What's the fallout from North Korea's support for Russia in its war with Ukraine? Thousands of its troops are said to have joined the battlefield. Pyongyang says it will stand by Moscow until the end. What does it mean for the fragile balance of power in Asia? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. The United States says 10,000 North Korean soldiers are now on Russian soil, preparing to enter the war against Ukraine. Most are in Russia's Kursk region, where Ukraine launched a counter-invasion almost 3 months ago. Fighting there has been intense, and some analysts say the addition of North Korean troops could change the dynamics of the conflict. As the Kremlin struggles to enlist new recruits, Pyongyang has pledged unwavering support for Moscow. Does Vladimir Putin's reach for North Korean troops reveal a military stretch to breaking point? Or is this a sign of Russian strength as it builds new alliances? We'll delve deeper into these issues with our guests shortly. But first, this report from Axel Zamovich.
Thousands of soldiers from one of the world's most isolated nations heading to the battlefield for the first time.
We now assess that there are some 10,000 North Korean soldiers in total in Russia. And the most recent information indicates that as many as 8,000 of those North Korean forces have been deployed to the Kursk region. We've not yet seen these troops deploy into combat against Ukrainian forces, but we would expect that to happen in the coming days.
The groundwork was laid in September last year when Kim Jong-un made a rare foreign trip to meet Vladimir Putin in Russia's Far East. For Russia, facing heavy casualties and recruitment challenges, these soldiers help fill a crucial gap without risking another unpopular domestic mobilization.
Putin
is checking the reaction of the West. Putin is checking the reaction of NATO countries. Putin is also checking the reaction of South Korea. And I believe that after all of these reactions, Putin will decide and increase the contingent.
For North Korea, the benefits are several. Its military hasn't seen major combat since the Korean War armistice in 1953. The war in Ukraine provides a rare opportunity to gain battlefield experience with modern weapons and tactics. There's also money involved. It's estimated that each North Korean soldier will earn around $2,000 a month, but most of the salary will go straight to the leadership in Pyongyang. Combined with weapons sales worth an estimated $5.5 billion, this deployment is a financial lifeline for the heavily sanctioned nation. Pyongyang also hopes Russia will share military technology, including nuclear and missile expertise.
We have no doubt that under the wise leadership of the esteemed President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, the Russian army and people will certainly achieve a great victory in their sacred struggle to protect the sovereign rights and security interests of their state. And we once again assure that until the day of victory, we will always firmly stand next to our Russian comrades.
Washington says the deployment violates UN Security Council resolutions, as North Korea has been under sanctions since 2006 over its nuclear program. But Moscow is defiant.
I want to put one question to you. Even if everything that's being said about the cooperation between Russia and North Korea by our Western colleagues is true, why is it that the United States and its allies are trying to impose on everyone the flawed logic that they have the right to help the Zelensky regime mobilize for military and intelligence of NATO, and Russian allies have no right to do a similar thing?
The U.S. says any North Korean troops entering combat in Ukraine will become legitimate military targets. And now, South Korea is considering direct military aid to Ukraine, further straining relations on the Korean peninsula. Axel Zamovich, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's welcome our guests now. In Singapore, Graham Ong-Webb, an adjunct fellow at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. In Moscow, Pavel Felgenhauer, military analyst and political commentator. And in Tokyo, Craig Mark, lecturer at Hosei University and author of Abe Restoration, Contemporary Japanese Politics and Reformation. A very warm welcome again to all of you. Now, Pavel, we've heard from the US, NATO and the EU that North Korean troops are in Russia. We've not yet had confirmation from either Russia or North Korea. Are they there?
Well, officially, yes, neither Pyongyang nor Moscow are confirming, but they're not really denying too. And yesterday, and the visit that was just happened by the North Korean foreign minister to Moscow, she was talking about standing with the Russian military, supporting the Russian army fully till victory. And that rhetoric, well, could indicate that the entry of North Korean soldiers into the fight seems rather imminent, I would say.
OK. How do you think this is going to work logistically? If we could just touch on this, Pavel, for a moment, because, of course, North Korean troops will have been trained in very different ways and they have a very different language. So how's this going to work on the battlefield?
Well, basically, the North Korean training is Soviet, so that will help a bit. Their weaponry that they use is also classical Soviet, though there are also some problems. There are reports that the North Koreans are being airlifted from the Far East to European Russia and handed out weapons when they arrive. And that means, yes, they'll have also, again, Kalashnikov assault rifles, but they're of a different sort, much more modernized, different ballistics, different caliber. And they are not trained to use drones that are used massively by both sides in the Ukrainian war. And of course, they don't speak Russian at all. And that means that there's going to be a language barrier there. So yes, there's going to be lots of problems of trying to integrate them directly into the fight, since North Korea and Russian military have not had maneuvers together, didn't train for many, many decades since the Korean War to be cooperable on the battlefield. So they'll have to learn it as they go.
Craig, given all these differences and their relatively small number, if you're looking at it in terms of the number of Russian soldiers on the battlefield, what difference are these North Korean troops likely to make to the war?
Well, I think they'll make a marginal difference in military terms, but in terms of symbolic importance, they obviously have a great appeal for Vladimir Putin. Given that the Russians have suffered grievous losses, estimated over 100,000 dead, 500,000 wounded, much probably higher. Even 10,000 North Korean troops can make a bit of a marginal difference, particularly if they're going to be employed on the Kursk front, as reports suggest. But essentially, Vladimir Putin appears to be making a statement through this deployment that Russia is taking advantage of its alliance with North Korea, which it has been steadily building up over the past couple of years. Of course, there's been reports which both Russia and North Korea initially denied that North Korea has been supplying munitions to Russia, and previously possibly some advisors on the use of technology such as missiles and rockets. But this is such a dramatic, historic intervention, with, of course, this being the first time North Korean troops have been deployed in combat overseas since the Korean War. It's obviously much more of a diplomatic statement than a military one, I think.
Graham, to what extent do you agree with that this deployment on the battlefield, at least, will only make a marginal difference?
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I respect Craig's comment. I think in the onset, this looks quite symbolic. It's a diplomatic gesture, a commitment to an agreement that was made as late as June in terms of the signing of a mutual defense pact or a mutual defense clause that features within a strategic comprehensive partnership between Russia and North Korea. But I think we need to watch the situation a little bit more closely. I think when you get down into the brass tacks of what's going to happen in the Kursk region, I think the picture looks slightly different. So I think right now it is true that these 10,000 or so troops are acclimatizing and adapting themselves to the conditions, the weather conditions and the terrain and the way in which the Russian military operates, at least within the Kursk region, to which they will be committed to. But I think we need to watch over the next ensuing weeks and months as to how these 10,000 troops perform. What are their roles going to be exactly? From what's available on open media right now, media reports, they appear to be playing a support role. They'll be expected to work in a logistical role, in a support role, contributing to fortifications and to the supply train and whatnot, with a small portion of this 10,000 troops, presumably elite soldiers from the Storm Corps. But I think as we go along, these troops can be expected to become more optimal as they learn on the job and will be expected to fill other roles as Russian troops face challenges on the ground. So I think we need to watch this carefully. The other point I'd like to add is that it's not a static situation. We can't foreclose the possibility that North Korea may inject more troops over time.
Sure. And Pavel, I mean, we get to the question then as to why North Korea would do this. Why would it deploy its troops? As Craig says, this is historic. It's never deployed troops into combat for many, many years. What would Russia be giving in return?
Well, Russia will be giving money to begin with. And actually, the cooperation became earlier than, sending troops is dramatic, but North Korea is providing ammo for the Russian heavy guns, the Russian howitzers, and the South Koreans say it's up to 10 million rounds, which is a lot. And that is really strategically important and for the Russian military because the present fighting in Ukraine consumes enormous amounts of heavy howitzer shells. For North Korea, it's they were isolated for many, many years, especially after the end of the Cold War. They were almost in full isolation, and now they tried to build under President Donald Trump a better relationship with America. That didn't work out. And now they have a nuclear superpower as their sort of ally. And that's for them very, very important. And also it's going to be a supply of money, also from the troops. Most of their salary, which is North Korean terms, would be very high. Russian soldiers are paid a minimum of about $2,000 a month in the Ukrainian war, and that's a lot for North Korea. And of course, all that money is going to go direct to the coffers in Pyongyang. So North Korea has a lot to win. They're also most likely eager to get Russian technologies. You'll have to see Russian weapons, say like new fighters, because the one they have are very old. Some other Russian new weaponry, and that's for them would be very important politically, technically, and they most likely may have actually initiated more the sending of these troops than Moscow did.
Now, Craig, obviously Asia, East Asia especially, is watching the situation very closely, probably with some alarm to see North Korea's involvement so closely tied with Russia in Ukraine. If we focus on the Korean Peninsula, it's been 70 years since the Korean War ended in a truce, but some are saying that North Korea and South Korea are now engaging in a proxy war in Europe. Would you agree with that?
To a limited extent. It remains to be seen how South Korea especially will act. If South Korea carries out large-scale supplies of weapons and munitions to Ukraine, then that would certainly make the case that there is a bit of a proxy indirect war happening.
Because it hasn't yet.
No, not yet, but if that does eventuate, that would happen. Over the past year, especially since the Yoon administration, relations have been steadily deteriorating between North and South Korea. Just recently, a couple of weeks ago, the North Koreans rather spectacularly blew up the road and rail links just over the border between North and South Korea over an industrial area where in the past there have been negotiations to create cross-border trade. So plus also there's been the so-called balloon wars, the North Koreans sending balloons basically full of garbage over to the south, and South Korea also allegedly sending drones for surveillance to the north. So this diplomatic deterioration between North and South Korea is also potentially escalating through this proxy effort in Ukraine.
Graham, to what extent do you agree with that? I mean, we've got North Korea saying now that it does not want to seek reconciliation with the South. As Craig said, it's tested its first intercontinental ballistic missile this year. Its rhetoric is heightening, saying that it's an explosive situation on the peninsula. Is it seeking conflict at this time?
Is North Korea seeking conflict with the South, you're asking?
Yes.
Well, it's hard to say if it is explicitly so, but I think it is clearly being very belligerent. There's recent posturing or decision by North Korea to send in troops into Russia to assist the Russian side is clearly not constructive. I mean, the South Korean government is up in arms clearly, and we're watching the news cycle closely. The National Intelligence Service, which is the intelligence agency under the South Korean government, is providing a lot of ongoing reports and statements of concerns about what this can mean in North-South relations. So clearly, it's not a constructive development, and it's in fact a destructive development. And it remains to be seen how South Korea is going to react. It's interesting. There was a study that was published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the US-based think tank, about how South Korea, there are indications that South Korea may seek to move away from its non-lethal aid policy under the Yoon administration to something a little bit more overt. And so there is this the discussion about supplying the Ukrainian military with more artillery ammunition, to which the South Korean military has an ample supply of a particular class of ammunition, the 105 millimeter artillery shells, to which it does not need so much anymore. And presumably this supply would be useful to the Ukrainian military. So I would be personally watching this development to see what South Korea is going to do next.
Now, the other country, of course, to be keeping a close eye on amid all of this is China. Pavel, China has been growing closer to Russia since it started its war in Ukraine. It's also never sent weapons to Moscow. But would it support this North Korea troops transfer?
Well, right now, China is saying that this is a problem between Moscow and Pyongyang, and that it's their sovereign right to do what they ever want. Though there have been indications that China is not very happy, because if this causes additional tension in the Korean Peninsula, that's not what China actually wants there to happen. They want stability there. China will not be joining in this effort, of course, because trade with Europe and the United States is very, very strategically important for China. They won't do anything that could lead to sanctions, secondary sanctions on them. But they won't condemn it too. So China is going to try and keep a low profile and hope that this doesn't bring any kind of serious escalation, since militarily it doesn't change the strategic outlay on the front lines in Ukraine. So it's a politically symbolic thing, but if it doesn't really infringe on Chinese interests, and China's interest is mostly stability in the Korean Peninsula, China is going to kind of have a hands-off attitude, I believe.
Graham, do you agree with that? Because China obviously has key influence over North Korea. It's one of its main allies. It also has a certain degree of influence over China, and it's enjoyed that position in the region. But to what extent does this new alliance, this stronger alliance between Russia and North Korea, threaten China's influence?
To a fair degree, I concur with Pavel's assessment. That for some time, China had not quite a monopoly of its influence over North Korea, but a dominant influence over North Korea. And even the Americans have turned to China now and then to sort of get the North Koreans to calm down or ratchet things down when things got heated up. But now China has to compete with Russia in having influence over what North Korea can and will do. And this creates a problem for China, particularly at a time when North Korea is attracting too much attention on Northeast Asian security affairs through North Korea's recent overtures, its saber rattling, its ICBM tests, and whatever is to come down the road, which is not looking very good. And this is just building the heat on the region. And China would like things to stay status quo because things are already quite tense between China and the West, particularly the United States. And as Pavel said, China wants to have a more balanced situation because it's intricately tied to the Western centric or Western dominant global economy. And so Chinese economic interests trump at this time as well, and not to have things go topsy-turvy. So right now, I think there is a fair amount of concern within the Chinese government about what to do regarding this recent development. And it seems to be losing a little bit of control over its influence in North Korea.
I mean, there may well be a very tense relationship between the US and China, but that's not stopping the US asking China to try to prevent North Korea sending troops to Russia. Craig, the question is China willing to do that? And indeed, can it do that?
No, I don't think there's much China can do to restrict any deployment by North Korea to Russia, whether it's troops or weapons for that matter, since, of course, China has been, in a sense, indirectly supporting Russia's war effort in Ukraine through supplying critical technologies, and also by being just in general a important trading partner for Russia, and of course for North Korea. North Korea overwhelmingly remains dependent on China, at least for 90% of its trade. And so in that sense, China does have some limited leverage over North Korea. And China also, as was mentioned, will not be enthusiastic to see North Korea escalating tensions too much in the region, including through its missile testing. But ultimately, there is quite a limit to what China can do to stop Kim Jong-un's regime and Vladimir Putin cooperating to the extent that they have.
And Pavel, the US is estimating that China is recruiting a whopping 25 to 30,000 soldiers, new soldiers every month, just to replace the dead and the wounded on the battlefield. How desperately does Russia need these North Korean men?
Well, let's say there are numbers right now, according to President Vladimir Putin, there's over 600,000 Russian servicemen deployed in the war zone in Ukraine. So additional troops most likely will be welcome. I don't think they'll change that much because the numbers are not very high. It will be problems to integrate them on the battlefield, so most likely it will be done very gradually. And so it's more symbolic, but North Korean support is important politically, and it's important very much that they have been sharing their stockpiles of heavy howitzer, 122 5-inch and 152 6-inch guns, and that is strategically important. So North Korea, as a an ally that's ready to stand with Russia, because while North Korea was isolated, Russia is not isolated, of course, but directly supplying, supporting on the battlefield would be very important. Hopefully, it won't bring additional escalation, neither in the Far East nor in the Ukrainian situation. Then, for Russia, that would be advantageous, I would say.
Craig, Russia's war in Ukraine is being seen now as a war of attrition. The longer it continues and the longer North Korea is sending troops to Russia, we understand that dialogues are continuing between the two sides, so we are likely to see more troops arrive in the future. But of course, that would then mean more money for the North Korean regime, and it props that up, doesn't it? So what impact is this going to have on North Korea as a country?
Well, if Vladimir Putin supplies not only money and funds, but also technology, that will only enhance and encourage Kim Jong-un's regime to continue their development of nuclear weapons, particularly ICBMs. And also, North Korea has one of the largest land armies in the world, over 1.2 million troops. So there's potential for Kim Jong-un to supply Russia with troops for months and possibly years to come. So there's this threatens to only extend the war in Ukraine, put further pressure on President Zelensky's government, and it really ups the ante and puts the diplomatic pressure on Ukraine's backers, particularly the European Union, also the United States, and other countries like Japan and Australia outside of Europe and America, which have also supported Ukraine, mostly with financial, but with some equipment supplies as well. So North Korea, as we've been mentioning on this panel, has definitely escalated and worsened the situation in the Ukrainian war.
OK, many thanks indeed to all our guests for joining us today. Very interesting discussion. Graham Ong-Webb, Pavel Felgenhauer and Craig Mark. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, do go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.